Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the box model, and I'll also cover box sizing and comparing the two different models. The box model is a fundamental concept for CSS. Every element, whether it's inline or block, in any document generates this box which has properties like width and height, padding, borders, and margins. Now all elements have these properties, but they behave differently depending on if they're block level or inline. Take a look at this image. This box is showing what takes up space, both width and height, in our browser. Now our content, this is the core of the element box. That inner edge is invisible inside of the browser. Around the content we have padding, and this is the space that we use to set between the content and whether or not we use a border. That border is a line or stylized line that surrounds the content, and then we have this margin, which is an optional amount of space that's outside of the border. The margin is always going to be transparent. You can't color a margin any more than you can add color to a padding. And then we have the outside edge of that margin. Let's compare this to an HTML element and the preview. I'm going to use the Week 9 demo from Blackboard called Box Model. If you'd like to download and follow along, just open that up in VS Code. I'm going to take a few moments to rearrange my screen and I'll be right back. Okay, you'll see in my VS Code editor, up on the very top left-hand side is my CSS. Below that is my HTML file. I have the image directly in the middle and the preview is on the far right-hand side. Now if you look in my HTML, I have an H2 element that says fresh from the oven. And on the right-hand side, I have fresh from the oven displayed. So in terms of our box model, when I say content, I'm referring to everything between the opening H2 and the closing H2. So fresh from the oven is my content. You can see up in my CSS though, I don't have any additional styles applied to that H2, so you can't really see any padding or margin or a border. But the cool thing is, our browser is already going to use a user agent style sheet to apply some of the items that are in our box model. So keeping our image in mind, I'm going to go ahead and open up Developer Tools inside of Chrome. I'll use the shortcut for function F12. So notice all the way over on that right-hand side, inside of our Developers Tools, there's a box model in there already. So I'm going to inspect that H2 element that we were just talking about that says fresh from the oven. I'll use my Inspect Element selector, and I'm just going to hover over H2, and you can see the pop-up right away tells me that it's an H2, its color, font, and look at that, there's a margin. Well, we didn't put that there, however, our browser did. Okay, now that I've selected that H2, let's see what's really going on over here. See how we have that user agent style sheet and it's applying that margin? That's a default set by the browser. And our box model shows us how big our content is, that currently we don't have any padding, we don't have a border, and we don't have margins on the left and the right hand side, just on the top and the bottom. If I hover over any one of those items in the box model, watch what it does in our browser. So while I'm hovering over the box model, it's actually showing us what's going on in the element in our browser. If I scroll in, you can see that it doesn't highlight a border, it doesn't highlight padding, but it does highlight our content. And see how the content is going all the way across the width of its container? That tells us that we're looking at or we're hovering over a block level element. So this is actually going to tell us what's happening in pixels. Even if we set our margins or our padding using a different measurement, the browser is going to convert that to pixels. Let's inspect a few more elements. Again, I'm going to use Inspect Element, and I'll select the header, the main element, or our H1. And if I select the body element out of our HTML, notice how there's a margin all the way around the entire body. Again, it's being applied by our user agent style sheet. Now, since the default margins can become kind of a hindrance for a lot of developers, you might see it reset to 0, but it's not a requirement. In fact, let's go do that in our CSS. Let me scroll all the way to the top of the CSS, and here you can see our body selector. It doesn't have margin in it, which means the browser did indeed put a margin on our page. Let's reset everything to 0 by using the property of margin and the value of 0. Now with my changes saved, I'm going to head back over to Developers Tools and check it out again. I'll again inspect element and select body, and now you can see the user agent style sheet's preset margin of 8 pixels has been crossed off because I overwrote it in my external style sheet by setting the margin to 0. This is going to become really important when it comes to figuring out how we're going to calculate the width of our elements by the content. It's important that we understand how the box sizing works. By default, the browser calculates the width of an element by the content. Let's take a look at an image. We have two different ways that we can actually use box sizing. The default size is to go with what's called the content box. If we set our content's width to be 500 pixels, it doesn't take into consideration any padding or border that sits around it. When we're using border box for our box sizing, we're saying the total for 500 pixels needs to include the content, the border, the padding, everything has to go into that value. So since the default that the browser uses is to calculate the width of our element by its content, we can either choose to use that model or we can use the other model. The measurements can make sizing kind of difficult, so a lot of developers will choose to apply the border box property value pair to the HTML element. This property sets the width measurement to be determined by the entire box model and not just the content. It cuts down on the little nuanced things that can go into sizing your page when you have a lot going on with borders, padding, content, and so on. Now the way that we do this is to go to our CSS and set a value on our HTML element. I'm going to scroll my HTML down just to give us some more space so that we can work with the CSS more. I'm going to add an HTML selector to the very top of my page. And I'm setting the box sizing to border box. Now this doesn't automatically cascade or push down to all of the elements on the page. So to fix that, we're going to use the universal selector of asterisk. And we're setting it to box sizing inherit so that it pulls down all of that border box from the HTML selector. Okay, I wanted to keep this video super short because I just wanted to introduce this portion of it. So just a quick recap, every element has a box that surrounds it. And while we can add things like width and height to those box dimensions for the margin and the padding and the content, we can't necessarily add colors or other styles to our margin and our padding. The values that we use to specify our box dimensions for width and height are length, percentage, and auto. Our two types of box sizing models that we could use are the content box and the border box. Now the content box is default and it applies width and height to the value of just the content portion only, whereas the border box sizing applies the width and the height values to the entire border box, including the padding and content. Please make sure you're checking out Chapter 14 in our textbook, and if you have any other questions about this material, please don't hesitate to ask.